Hey, look at that. Hey, look at that. Hey, everybody, it's Mark. Welcome to a live stream talking about the marginal decade. What is the marginal decade, why it's important, and what we can do to start training for it. So if any of you are probably older than 40 years old, you're getting closer to the end of your life than the beginning of your life. And that's really what we're talking about when we say the marginal decade. We're talking about that last decade of your life, whenever that is. Heck, I guess I could be in the last decade of my of my life right now. I don't know. I could step outside the door and get hit by the proverbial bus, but I'm still here. But for most people, the marginal decade is that last decade of our lives. And it's something to be thinking about and planning for as early as possible. And so we're going to talk about that tonight. Hopefully anybody that is watching can more than welcome to leave a message in the chat. I'll do what I can to answer as many questions as people may have as we're going through this. Definitely after the stream, if you're watching this after it is live and you have any comments or anything, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. And I've been doing pretty good at trying to get back and at least read every comment that comes in and hopefully answer as many as possible. So as always, any conversation or questions or comments, more than welcome to leave them down below. So I'm going to break it down a little bit into what is the marginal decade, why it's important, what we should be thinking about, why we should be thinking about it, and then what are the components that we need to be thinking about, and then how do we train for this marginal decade. So first thing I wanted to show is basically what is the marginal decade? Isn't it, is that today, tomorrow, 20 years from now? What exactly is it? And the answer is that the marginal decade, at least as I think about it, and a lot of people think about it who are interested in having as healthy a life as possible, as far into life as possible, is the marginal decade is that last decade of your life. And for most of us, if we make it to adulthood, and if we make it into late middle age, retirement age, the odds are that we're going to live into our probably late 70s, 80s, probably or potentially even into our 90s and beyond. So the marginal decade is that final decade. Now, obviously, we don't know when that will happen, but we can start planning for it now, with the idea being that we want to be as strong and vital and engaged and healthy as possible as late into life, or as far into life as possible. And that's really what we are thinking about training for, is that marginal decade, that last 10 years. I know for me personally, and I think a lot of you would probably agree, that it would be much better to live to, let's just say, 80 years old and be vital and strong and active and engaged right up until right up until that the time that you die. So in other words, you're just going and doing things, engaged, having fun, enjoying life, being able to get around, stay engaged, be active, be mobile, and then bang, you go to sleep one night and you don't wake up, and that's it. I think most of us would rather have that than the alternative of living to, say, 90 years old, but the last 10 years of your life you're bedridden, you're unable to move, you're unable to do anything for yourself. You need somebody to help you all the time to do anything at all. You can't move. Maybe you have declined both mentally and cognitively as well as physically. I think a lot of us would agree that you'd much rather maybe have a little shorter life, but be vital and active and engaged all the way up until the end, compared to having a longer life where you're not able to do anything. You're not able to enjoy life. I know for me, that's my goal. I'd like to live as long as possible, but I want to be as healthy as possible, as far into the game as possible. And that's what the marginal decade is it's that last 10 years. And the idea is, in that marginal decade, what do you want to be doing in that decade? Okay, and that kind of comes back to this right here, and that is that we want to be engaged and active as long as possible into life. And that's why it's important. We need to be thinking long term and doing what we can to stay as vital as possible for as long as possible. I'm just going to share a screen, hopefully here, and see. Yeah, we'll do that, and maybe share a screen. Come on, there we go. Let's see if that works. Nope. Okay. So why is the marginal decade important? I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm trying out OBS as a streaming platform, and I've dialed it in, I think, but obviously not quite enough. But the next slide I was going to put up there is, why is that marginal decade important? Why is it important? And I think I just covered that. It's important because we want to be we need to be thinking about that so we can be planning ahead and positioning ourselves to be in as good a shape as possible when we get there, physically, mentally, and emotionally even. So how do we start thinking about that marginal decade? Now, right now, most of us, many of us that are watching or watching this video either live or later, are probably active or maybe thinking about becoming active with maybe the goal of training for some event. Maybe it's a 5K, maybe it's a century ride, maybe it's a specific, going on a hike, a Spartan race, any particular event, running, cycling, swimming, whatever it is. We tend to want to get involved, getting active, and getting healthy and fit because we have a specific event that we are training for. So we tend to be very event focused, I think, as humans in general, and it's very easy to focus on that short-term event. Taking a bigger picture view of everything and focusing on that marginal decade is obviously it's a much longer timeline, and what we really want to be training for, if we are training for that marginal decade, is training to put ourselves in a position to do the things that we want to be able to do in that last decade of our life. And that's going to be different for everyone. Everyone is going to have different goals and objectives, but there's probably, a baseline that everybody would probably agree that it would be nice to be able to do when you are older or at the that last decade of your life. Things like, I want to be able to move on my own without assistance. I want to be able to be independent, which means things like, hey, I want to be able to take care of myself. I want to be able to get around. Maybe I want to be able to continue walking, taking my walks in the park, walking my dog, going to the store and getting groceries. I want to be able to travel, which means, hey, I need to be able to get through the airport, navigate the airport, take my carry-on bag, put it in the overhead bin. I want to play with my grandkids, right? So I want to be able to pick my grandkids up, play with them on the floor, get down and play with them on the floor, get back up, pick my grandkids up out of the crib, that type of thing. Or I want to stay as active as possible. What's it going to take to stay as active as possible when you're in your 80s, for example, compared to now when you're in your 40s or 50s? And that's what drives the training for the marginal decade, is you have to kind of look forward to see what you want to do at that point, way in the future. Just like you do now, you'd look at a goal at a race. If you're a runner like me and you say, hey, I want to do a 5K in 3 months, and I'd like to be able to run under 24 minutes or 25 minutes. Well, that's your goal. So you know that you're going to have to do some training in order to get your body hopefully to the point where you can do that. The marginal decade is no different, except the training we're doing is probably going to be a lot more varied, because what we're training for is to be able to be independent, strong, and vital, both physically as well as cognitively, mentally, and emotionally. So what's it going to take? So a good way of doing this, and Peter Attia talks about this in his as part of his practice. Many of you are probably familiar with Dr. Peter Attia. He's been one of the big proponents the last few years of all this Zone 2 training. I did a video on that last year, and it's the most popular video on the channel. Lots of people are looking for information on Zone 2 training, which has been more and more evidence is coming out that it's one of the biggest or best things we can do to improve our aerobic health and reduce the chance of dying across all cases, but also improving our resilience and all that. So Dr. Peter Attia has been kind of at the forefront of this health span and being as vital as possible, as long as possible. And one of the things he talks about is this marginal decade. And he uses the analogy of, take a look at what you want to do when you're in your 80s, figure out what it's going to take then, and backdate that to today, the present time, where you are now, and realize that decline is inevitable over time. You're going to decline both physically, especially strength, endurance, mobility. That's kind of a given. So you have to figure out what you want to do in that marginal decade and say, if I want to lift 30 pounds over my head now, I sure as heck better be able to probably lift 50 or 60 pounds over my head now, because If I can get to that point, then even with decline, I'll still be able to achieve my goal later on. So that's what we want to be thinking about in the marginal decade, is what we want to do at the end of our life, and then what's it going to take to put ourselves in the best position possible to be able to do that. So there are 4 components, I guess, that we probably should be looking at when it comes to the training for that marginal decade. First one is going to be aerobic fitness. So think of zone 2, think of VO2 max, high intensity intervals, that type of thing. Doing work in those domains, aerobic, cardiovascular fitness, will give us the ability to have the capacity to go for a walk when we're older, right? That type of thing. The second area is physical strength and stability. So think of adding muscle mass, adding strength, adding muscle mass to your body so that when you get older, you still have enough muscle mass and strength to be able to do the things that you want to do. The third area is kind of in there is strength and stability. And what we mean by that is not only having a six-pack or strong core, but also being able to move properly and in a way that doesn't damage our body and increase that rate of decline that we will experience as we get older. So things like balance training, range of motion, mobility in the joints particularly, so the feet, the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, all these things we want to do what we can to improve not only the strength of those joints, but also the durability and the range of motion. Can you lift your arm over your head completely? A surprising number of people can't by the time they're in their 50s. They have what's called shoulder, I think it's impingement, where you can't get your shoulder above a certain height. Can you get your shoulder up? And how flexible is that joint? How mobile is that joint? How mobile are your hips, your ankles, your knees, which allow you to be able to squat down, to walk, to stabilize, to prevent falls? All of that enters in there. The third major area is going to be cognitive resilience, training and building up as much cognitive reserve as possible so that we reduce the impact or chances of being impacted by things such as Alzheimer's, dementia, those type of anything we can do to improve the health of our cognitive functions, to fortify them against, once again, that age-related decline that we will all experience. It's just a question of where are we starting that decline and where are we ending up. If we're starting at a very low level and then we decline from there, we're going to be off the charts, negative, bad, way low. If we start up here and we decline over time, which we will, we're still going to end up at a good place. So that's the concept that I think we should be thinking about and considering is, what do we want to do at the end of our lives, and what's it going to take to get our bodies to a level now that, given the inevitable decline that we experience as we get older, no matter where we're starting, we're going to have decline. How can we get our bodies, what's it going to take to get our bodies to that position now, so with that decline, we're still well above average and in the condition and the shape and in a position where we can do those things that we want to do. That's the training, I think, philosophy that we need to be thinking about. For myself, give a lot of you that have been watching the channel have kind of seen kind of what I've gone through the last couple of years. I've had a couple of injuries. I've retweaked a knee that I originally tweaked back in college, so 35, almost 40 years ago. That's been bugging me. I've introduced a very focused knee strength and knee mobility and strengthening program. I think I've nipped that in the bud. Last year, I had a hip adductor strain. So basically that muscle that runs from your hip across the inside of your thigh down there, that was what the doctor called a persistent strain, which came back to, once again, strength and mobility. So since February, was it 2022, January 2022, I've really been focused on overall strength and mobility, not just aerobic conditioning, which up to that point, I was all aerobics all the time. Occasional strength training here and there, very infrequent mobility and flexibility and stability training. But now I've mixed up my program. I've changed my focus pretty much 180 degrees. I still enjoy running races, like I did the Peachtree Road Race this past July, just a month or two ago. I've done this race, this was a 5K. I've done those and I will still run those, but that's not the focus of my training. That's one of the things I get to do because of my training, but that's not the focus. The focus for me at this point, and frankly, I wish I would have started it a little earlier, is focusing on being in the best position possible for me in 20 to 30 years when I'm in my 80s and hopefully into my 90s and beyond. So what am I doing? I've been, as of April of last year, I started a dedicated, committed, serious strength training program, actually lifting heavy weights with the barbell. I've been doing, focusing on upper body with bench as well as shoulder press. I've been adding in lower body, so barbell back squats, starting to do some more deadlift type exercises, but I've been very cautious on that because a key part of being able to do deadlifts and squats is that hip strength and mobility. So I've really been focusing on that. It's a process, but I've, at this point in my life, going to be 59 here sooner rather than later. I think overall, I'm in the best shape of my life when I use the definition of shape being aerobic, not only aerobic, but also strength, mobility, and flexibility. I think if you take all that together, put it in one big pot and stir it up, I think I'm in the best overall shape and condition that I've been in my entire life. I'm definitely stronger now than I have been at any point in my life. Aerobically, I can't run as fast as I could when I was in my 20s or 30s, but my aerobic conditioning and abilities are still way up there compared to the average, and my goal is to keep it way up there, so when I get to be in my 80s or 90s, they're still pretty solid. So you take all that together, my overall fitness and conditioning is probably the best that it's ever been. And that should be the goal, I think, for all of us if we want to live and be as vital as possible, as long as possible into life. And it all starts with that marginal decade, figuring out what we want to be able to do at the end of our life, and then take that back to today and say, oh, this is what I want to be able to do. What am I going to need to do now to get my body in the position where I'll be able to do that later? And you can't just look at, well, if I want to, put 30 pounds over my head, taking a carry-on and putting it in the overhead bin in a plane. Yeah, that's 25, 30 pounds. You can do that today easily. But today you can do it. But what about 25 years from now if you don't train it? Maybe you won't be able to lift that 25-pound carry-on up over your head because your shoulder mobility is gone, your strength is gone, all of that. So you need to be working on building up that level of strength and shoulder mobility and keeping it at a high level. So when you get to that point in the future, you're still able to do what you want to do. And it all starts with the marginal decade. So taking a bigger picture approach to your fitness and not focusing on not being the best runner or the best cyclist, but being kind of a jack of all trades who is aerobically fit, can do endurance, can also do short, fast intervals. So you got VO2, you got zone 2 and then VO2 max intervals, but can also do pull-ups, push-ups, lift weights over their head, do all of that. Well-rounded, complete strength as well as endurance, and then add on top of that the cognitive and emotional strength that, honestly, research is showing now that strength training, zone 2, VO2 max training, all those activities actually strengthen the brain by helping the brain grow and develop through hormones and stuff that are released when we exercise and move our bodies and push our bodies and test our bodies. All that is good for the brain. So by doing the zone 2, the VO2 max, the strength training, the mobility training, the balance training, stability training, all of that is training your brain as well. So that's a side benefit. So there you go. The marginal decade. I think it's something that all of us need to be thinking about now rather than later, and start training for it now, so that when we get to later, we're in the position, the best position we can be in, to be as vital and active and engaged as we can be in our 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe even hundreds and beyond. I was just, brings back a great story. A few weeks ago, my wife and I went and did a Atlanta Track Club event here in the Atlanta area. It's one of the benefits that you get of being an Atlanta Track Club member. It was a race and an event that was purely for Atlanta Track Club members. I think there were 2,000 people there, but it was a 4-mile race. So there were people that were running, and there were people that were walking. I walked it with my wife. We walked a pretty quick pace. I think we ended up walking, it's up and down. If any of you have been in Atlanta, you know that Atlanta has a fair amount of hills, and we were walking through the Decatur part of town called Decatur. So we're going up and down around the neighborhood. So it was a fair amount of hills. We managed to walk that 4 miles in basically 16 minutes a mile, just right at 16 minutes a mile. There was a gentleman that we passed at the very end, and he was keeping pace with us on the flats. We would pull ahead of him a little bit on the hills. He would catch up to us a little bit on the downhills. We finished a little bit ahead of him, but turns out that gentleman was 88, 89 years old, and he finished about a minute behind us. So he was walking 16-minute miles at age 89. Now, which was fantastic. But there was a lady there who was 98 years old, or 99. Victoria was her name. I can't remember her last name. She did the 4 mile, and it was hot and humid, a typical summer weather here in Atlanta. So about 70 degrees we started right at sunrise, basically 70, 75 degrees and very humid. She did the 4 miles in 17:30 a mile, 17:38 a mile. So 3.5 miles an hour up and down the hills in the summer heat. She was 98, at least 98, maybe 99. That's the type of person I want to be. I want to be like that gentleman who was 89, or that lady who was 98, and still being able to go out and walk for 4 miles in 3 miles an hour or faster. That is something to shoot for. And in order to do that, you've got to be training now 20, 30 years ahead of time. So when you get to that point, you're still able to do it. But that was super, super inspiring to see people that old still that vital and engaged and active and participating in their community. It's fantastic. So I think that should be a model for all of us to shoot for. Do what we can now to fortify our bodies to allow us to do those things later on. That's it for this live stream. If you're watching this after the fact, be sure to leave a comment down below about things you are doing, any programs you're following, things you found helpful to kind of help you do that. I'm going to be doing more videos on the marginal decade, how to be training for it, things to be thinking about. So stay tuned for that. If you like what you're seeing here and you want to share it with others, big thumbs up. Like this video. That helps spread the word about what we're doing here at Life Maximus to the rest of the YouTube world. And if you want to be part of the community, go ahead and subscribe. It's a great way to do it. Become one of those subscribers. Our subscribers we're getting more and more joining every day. So we're starting to get some traction here. People are tuned in to this idea of living as long as possible, but also as healthy and vital as possible for as long as possible. So I will be here doing these videos as long as possible. So maybe I need to add that to my marginal decade. Do you want to see me in anybody down in the comments? Do you want to see me doing videos about the marginal decade 30 years from now when I'm 88, almost 89? Let me know down below. All right. Until the next one, take care, everybody, and be well.